Hey everyone, a quick update before we start this video. Since recording this interview with Clara and Gordon, SDOT has announced their Stay Healthy Streets program, in which 2.5 miles of streets in the Central District and in West Seattle, it'll be closed to through traffic, so local people who live there can still access their homes and deliveries can still happen. But otherwise, it should be open for people walking and biking. And this is the first of what the city hopes is, maybe even 15 miles of such streets that they're hoping to roll out. And these are going to be 24/7 projects, which is really exciting. So as you watch this interview, just know that the city has begun taking some of these ideas into account and making them happen. So with that said, here's the interview. Welcome everybody to Seattle Bike Blog TV. I'm your editor, Tom Fukuloro.
Hey, I'm Gordon, the executive director of Seattle Neighborhood Greenways.
I'm Clara Cantor. I'm a community organizer with Seattle Neighborhood Greenways.
Great. Well, thank you both for joining me. And we're going to talk about what role can open streets play in just creating more space for people. And I know Seattle Neighborhood Greenways has been thinking a lot about this and talking to a lot of neighborhood organizations about this. And I guess, what have you been hearing from people?
I would say on the whole, we've been hearing two really big major troubles right now. The first is that people are just seeing a lot of other people on the sidewalks outside. There's a lot of people walking around, and in some neighborhoods, it's not quite such a problem because there's space for people to be walking around and still maintaining distance from each other. In other neighborhoods, it's really problematic. And the other big thing we've been hearing is, there's a lot fewer vehicles on the streets now. And basically what that's meaning is that they're going a lot faster. So there's a lot of speeding and a lot of people feeling really in danger when they're trying to cross the streets or walking down the street as they're trying to avoid folks on the sidewalk.
I guess, what have you seen from other cities that have attempted to address this issue? Like, have you seen anything that seems to have worked?
Yeah, I mean, it's an exciting time in terms of cities sharing solutions. The cities around the world are facing the exact same challenge of everyone trying to reduce contact with others. And our sidewalks and our trails really aren't set up for that. Here in Seattle, there's hardly any sidewalks where you can safely stay 6 feet away from each other. And our trails are oftentimes the same way. But we're not the only city facing sort of challenges. We're seeing really exciting leadership coming out of Oakland right now in particular. They're going to 75 miles of neighborhood streets that are going to be local access only, which is a really exciting model. We're also seeing some other ideas coming out of places like Berlin and Vancouver and Minneapolis, where they're converting popular streets along parks or other sort of high destination areas to create more space for people to recreate, so they're not having that sort of crowding in the parks and trails that the public health officials are really warning against.
Have you heard from any city officials you've talked to or elected officials who seem to be aware of this issue or have any ideas of their own, or what kind of momentum is there at the city?
We've heard that the city's thinking about it, and one thing I think local advocates need to be aware of is just Seattle was hit really hard by the coronavirus. Some of these other cities have had a little more breathing room to deal with the epidemic and also think about open streets, but we were really, one of the first, if not the first, cities in the US to have a major outbreak. So I think it's understandable that it's taken a little more time than in some cities to get these ideas up and running. But that said, if we're going to keep a level of social distancing through the summer, we've got to really start planning for that now. And I think the city is starting to think about it.
How do you balance the desire to solve this, problem crowding on sidewalks and paths with not wanting to advocate for something that would require resources at a time of crisis in which resources are so stretched? Like, how do you balance that, I guess, as advocates?
I think one of our big goals is that whatever we're advocating for, whether it's local access only streets or streets that are closed to traffic near or in parks, or streets that are just giving a little bit of extra space to pedestrians, whether it's a parking lane or something like that. Whatever it is, it needs to be something that can be installed and just left there 24/7, so that it doesn't require a lot of staff time. It doesn't require a police presence. Maybe it'll need a little bit of maintenance check every so often, but it's not going to be something that needs staffing like you would see for a traditional open streets event, like Bike Sundays or summer play streets kind of events. We're picturing something like traffic cones or construction barriers that would turn infrastructure into something else and be temporary, but be something that can just be left there.
Yeah, I started wondering like how many cones and barricades do we have? Like in the city, like they got those yards full of them, but how many is that actually? Let's find out.
I mean, that's the level of analysis I'd like to get to with this proposal. Is we think you would need this many A-frame signs. We think you would need this many cones, and just be really honest about what it would take. And then we can have a conversation about whether that's feasible or not.
Right.
The other thing I would say is that we're also looking at places where the city has already done some planning and outreach. So ideas like neighborhood greenways that already have an established purpose, an established route. There's community buy-in, places like that aren't going to be big swishes and big changes.
We're also trying to be really cautious that we want to be collaborative with city government right now. We don't want to be coming out and doing sort of our oftentimes strident advocacy. We want to be trying to work in collaboration and problem solving with city government, because it's so important that we all are in this together and maintain trust in local government.
Right. Yeah, and is that a kind of a concern also? Like, what if they're a big hit? It's kind of that weird problem of usually when you do an open streets event, you want as many people to show up as possible. And this one, you're kind of hoping it's a mediocre response.
The traditional open streets are time limited. They're spatially limited to a very small area of the city. And they require lots of staffing and often policing. And the goal is crowding. The success of an open street event is how many people are showing up in any one given block to hang out and, do the hula hoop or run or walk their dogs or whatever. And so this is a very different kind of intervention. And so I think in a way, actually, the whole open streets concept, if you have a pre-formed idea of what that should look like, is holding some folks back from thinking about how this concept could be adapted. And so like Clara was saying, we're looking at having it be 24/7, so that's always there, so that you can go after work, you can go before work, you can go in the middle of the day. You don't have to just go at the afternoon on one weekend in the summer. And then having them be widespread enough that they're not a draw, right? Like we don't want to just do a 2-block segment along Green Lake or along Lake Washington Boulevard. We want to see a network of these streets created over time. Oakland's been doing a phased implementation. So that way we're not seeing that sort of crowding as if you might get if you were just to have it in one little small area.
I will also add to that we're focusing especially on routes where people can go to move through them, and connections to parks and other routes that people can make into larger loops if they want. Eventually, this will be routes that are seeing high pedestrian traffic for people walking to and from their destinations and back to work as our restrictions start to lift. But we're hoping to focus this on connected network and loops rather than destinations.
I would just say to your listeners too that we're absolutely still accepting feedback. We've got 111 comments so far, and we've read every single one of them, and we're really genuinely looking for community input, and we're trying to engage our community's allies and stakeholders in this conversation. So it's not just sort of coming out of a black box with a plan.
Great. Yeah, I'll put a link to the forum that you're writing on your website. I'll put that in the video description and on the blog post that goes with it.
That said, so far the concepts are relying pretty heavily on non-arterial streets to do some of the heavy work in terms of creating local access to only space like Oakland is doing. But that said, there are just certain streets that are critical that are arterials. Lake Washington Boulevard comes up over and over again in some of our denser parts of the city, like First Hill or downtown or South Lake Union. You pretty much have to be on some of the arterial streets for those routes. And then, obviously, some of the routes that we're seeing a lot of crowding on, like Gasworks in the Burke Gilman or Green Lake or Alki, the clearest solution is to provide some additional space by converting a travel lane or a parking lane.
Rainier Valley Greenways Safe Streets has been leading the charge on advocating for a bicycle fun days every day along Lake Washington, which would be wonderful.
Yeah, that'd be great.
And one concept that too is if it's too challenging to have the full bicycle Sundays every day, maybe you just have the waterside travel lane be converted to the pathway, because you don't have any driveways really to deal with other than a couple of parking lots, and if those are closed, it's pretty easy to just close that off, and then it's a one-way road, and you've got an additional 12 feet of sort of trail space that can be open 24/7 without any kind of staffing.
There are a lot of essential workers who are staying off the bus intentionally, and a lot of people who are trying out biking in particular as a new commuting route. We're seeing some of our neighborhood groups get questions about safest bike routes here and there from people who haven't previously been biking regularly. I also do think that it's really important to remember that there are a lot of people in our community who are 100% reliant on transit. And it's really helpful for those people to know that it's not going to be crowded on their bus line.
Thank you all for joining me to talk about this, and take care.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.